My parents uninvited me from Christmas. Your brother's fiancé doesn't want you there. Bad energy. I said, understood. Then I spent Christmas in Aspen on a $37,000 ski trip and posted one photo. Christmas morning, Mom called. The dinner is canceled. Nobody can afford to host. I asked, why is that my problem? Hello everyone. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old. And 3 days before Christmas, my mother sent me a text that changed the way I looked at my family forever. It said, don't come for Christmas this year. Samantha doesn't want you there. She says you bring bad energy. I stared at the screen. My brother's fiancé didn't want me at Christmas. And apparently, that was enough for my parents to uninvite their own daughter. I didn't argue. I didn't ask my mother to reconsider. I simply typed, understood. Then I put my phone down. What they didn't know was that I'd already been planning something. I'd spent months working overtime and saving for a trip I'd always dreamed about. Christmas in Aspen, a private chalet, 5 nights surrounded by snow-covered mountains, a beautiful Christmas dinner, skiing, a fireplace, and absolutely no family drama. So when they told me I wasn't welcome, I decided I wouldn't spend 1 second begging to be included. I booked the trip. I went to Aspen, and on Christmas morning, I posted exactly one photograph. No caption, no explanation, just a picture of a beautiful mountain covered in snow. 3 hours later, my mother called. The Christmas dinner was canceled, she said. Nobody could afford to host anymore. Then she asked me to come home. I looked out at the mountains and quietly asked, why would that be my problem? But before you can understand why that question mattered so much, you need to understand my family. I grew up with 2 siblings. My older brother Daniel was the golden child, and my younger sister Megan was the peacemaker. I was somewhere in between. Daniel was athletic, outgoing, and incredibly confident. My parents attended every football game he played. When he got his driver's license, Dad helped him buy a car. When he went to college, they paid for his apartment. When he started a business that failed within 2 years, Dad called it an important learning experience. I was different. I was quiet, independent. I started working at 16. I paid for most of my own things. Whenever I wanted something, my parents usually told me, you'll figure it out. So I did. I went to college, built a career in marketing, and eventually started my own consulting business. By my early 30s, I had a comfortable income, my own house, and enough savings that I could finally enjoy some of the things I'd spent years putting off. One of those things was Christmas in Aspen. I'd always loved winter. Every December, I'd look at photographs of Aspen and imagine waking up somewhere surrounded by snow. But whenever I'd mentioned it to my family, Mom would laugh. That's ridiculously expensive. Dad would say, why waste money on something like that? So I kept postponing it. Until this year. This year, I decided I was done postponing my own happiness. Then Daniel got engaged. His fiancée's name was Samantha. When I first met her, I honestly tried to like her. She was polished, attractive, and confident. I brought her a small gift. When Daniel introduced us officially, she thanked me. For a while, I thought everything was fine. Then I started noticing little things. At family dinners, Samantha rarely spoke directly to me. If I asked her about the wedding, she'd give me a short answer and change the subject. If I joined a conversation, she'd suddenly become quiet. I eventually asked Daniel if I'd done something wrong. He shrugged. She's just nervous around new people. I believed him. Until Thanksgiving. We were all sitting around the dining table when the conversation turned to Christmas. Mom was discussing dinner. Dad was talking about buying a tree. Daniel mentioned that Samantha wanted to keep the celebration small. Then Samantha looked directly at me. I think Christmas should be immediate family only. I smiled awkwardly. Sure. She didn't smile back. I mean people who are actually close. The table went silent. I looked at Daniel. He stared at his plate. I looked at Mom. She suddenly became very interested in her glass of wine. I finally asked, are you saying you don't want me there? Samantha sighed. I just think certain people bring tension. I stared at her. I've barely spoken to you. She shrugged. That's not the point. Daniel finally said, Samantha, maybe we should talk about this later. But he didn't defend me. That hurt. More than her words. Mom eventually said, let's not make this into a family argument. I nodded. Okay. I finished my dinner. I went home, and that night I made my Aspen reservation. I found a beautiful private chalet with a fireplace, mountain views, and access to the ski resort. The price was painful. Almost $37,000 for the entire trip. But I could afford it. And for once, I didn't want to ask myself whether my family thought it was a reasonable way to spend money. I wanted to know what I thought. I clicked confirm reservation and smiled. 3 days later, my mother texted me. Don't come for Christmas. I knew immediately. Then another message appeared. Samantha doesn't want you there. She says you bring bad energy. I read it twice, then typed, understood. Mom called almost immediately. I let it ring. She called again. I still didn't answer. Finally, she sent another text. Are you angry? I replied. No. Then another. Please don't make this difficult. I stared at that one for a long time. I finally wrote, I'm not making anything difficult. Then I put my phone away. I didn't tell them about Aspen. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Samantha. I simply packed. On December 23rd, I flew to Colorado. The moment I stepped outside the airport, cold air hit my face. I smiled. The mountains were covered in snow. The drive to the resort was beautiful. When I arrived at the chalet, a fire was already burning. There was a Christmas tree beside the window. A bottle of champagne sat on the table. Everything was peaceful. Everything was quiet. And nobody was telling me that I brought bad energy. Christmas Eve was perfect. I skied in the morning, had dinner at a beautiful restaurant that evening, then sat beside the fireplace with a book while snow fell outside. I barely thought about my family until I checked my phone before bed. There were several messages. Mom had sent pictures of the Christmas decorations. Daniel had sent a photograph of himself and Samantha beside the tree. I looked at the picture for a few seconds, then put my phone down. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't angry. I was simply realizing that I'd spent years trying to earn a place at a table where people could remove my chair whenever someone else asked them to. Christmas morning came quietly. I woke up early. The mountains outside my window were glowing in the sunlight. I made coffee, walked onto the balcony, and took one photograph. Snow-covered mountains, my Christmas tree visible through the glass doors, a champagne glass sitting beside me. I posted it online. No caption, no mention of my family, no explanation. Within minutes, people started commenting. Where is this? Absolutely beautiful. Merry Christmas. I smiled, then put my phone down. About an hour later, it rang. Mom. I almost ignored it, but I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded strange. Claire. Yes? The Christmas dinner was canceled. I frowned. Okay, nobody can host anymore. I didn't understand. What happened? She sighed. Your father and I thought Daniel and Samantha would host. They can't. Your brother can't afford it. I looked out the window. Okay. Mom became quiet. Then she said, could you come home? I almost laughed. Why? We're still family. I said nothing. She continued. We thought maybe you could help with the food. There it was. They hadn't suddenly missed me. They needed something. Again, I looked around the chalet, the fireplace, the Christmas tree, the mountains, the peaceful morning I'd paid for with my own money. Then I remembered the message I'd received 3 days earlier. Don't come for Christmas. Samantha doesn't want you there. Bad energy. And now, they needed me. Mom spoke again. Claire? I finally answered. Yes? Can you come home? I took a slow breath, then quietly asked, why would that be my problem? There was complete silence on the phone. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. I simply waited. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what my family would do when I stopped being the person who always rescued them. Sometimes, being rejected by the people you love feels like the worst thing that could happen, until you realize their rejection finally gave you permission to stop rescuing them. And as my mother sat silently on the other end of the phone, waiting for me to save the Christmas they had decided I wasn't good enough to attend, I looked out at the mountains and realized I had absolutely no intention of going home. For several seconds, neither my mother nor I said anything. Then she whispered, Claire, this isn't about what happened before. I almost smiled. Isn't it? No. Then why did you call me? Because Christmas is supposed to be about family. I looked out at the snow-covered mountains. 3 days ago, you told me I wasn't family enough to attend. Mom sighed. Samantha was uncomfortable, so I was removed. That's not what happened. It is exactly what happened. She became defensive. We were trying to avoid conflict. I laughed softly. By excluding me, Claire, I accepted your decision. So why are you calling? Mom didn't answer. I already knew. They needed money. They needed food. They needed someone to host. And somewhere in their minds, that person was always supposed to be me. I hope you have a nice Christmas, I said. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking, not because I regretted what I'd said, because I didn't. For the first time, I had chosen myself without feeling guilty. I spent the rest of Christmas morning exactly how I'd planned. I skied for 2 hours. Then I returned to the chalet and had lunch beside the fireplace. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone started buzzing again. This time it was Daniel. I ignored it. Then Samantha. Ignored. Then Dad. Ignored. Finally, Mom sent a message. We need to talk. I replied, "About what?" She answered, "The dinner." I stared at the screen, then typed, "You canceled it." Her response came quickly, "We thought you'd help." I laughed. There it was. No apology, no acknowledgement, just expectation. I replied, "You thought wrong," then turned my phone off. The next morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls. I turned my phone back on. There were messages from relatives, my aunt, my cousin, even Daniel's best friend. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that Christmas was canceled because Claire refused to help. I stared at the message. They had actually blamed me. I called my aunt. "Did Mom tell you I refused to help?" "Yes." I took a breath. "She didn't tell you she uninvited me." Silence. "What?" I explained everything. The message, Samantha's comment, the decision to exclude me. My aunt became quiet, then said, "Claire, I had no idea." "I know. Your mother made it sound like you abandoned everyone." I shook my head. "I didn't abandon anyone. They told me not to come." My aunt sighed. "That's awful. I didn't want sympathy. I simply wanted the truth known." So I sent her a screenshot of Mom's message. She stared at it, then said, "I'm sorry. Thank you." That conversation changed something. Because my aunt wasn't the only relative who had been given a different version. Within a few hours, the family group chat became chaotic. People started asking questions. Mom stopped responding. Daniel eventually sent a message. "Everyone needs to calm down." My cousin replied, "Maybe don't uninvite people and then blame them when your plans fall apart." Another relative agreed. Then Samantha left the group. For the first time, I wasn't the family problem. I was simply the person who had refused to accept being treated like one. 2 days later, I returned home from Aspen. My trip had been worth every penny. Not because of the luxury, because I had learned something. I didn't need my family to validate my choices. When I opened my front door, there was a package waiting. From Mom. I almost left it unopened. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Mom wrote, "Claire, I know you're angry. I know I handled Christmas badly. But I hope you understand that Samantha is going to be part of our family." I read the sentence twice, then continued, "We didn't want to start the marriage with conflict. Daniel is happy. I thought you could be the bigger person." I put the letter down. There it was again. The phrase they'd used my entire life. Be the bigger person. It always meant one thing. I was expected to tolerate something someone else had done. I wrote back, "Mom, being the bigger person doesn't mean allowing people to disrespect me. If Samantha doesn't want me around, that's her choice. But I won't pretend that her choice makes me the problem. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on mutual respect." I mailed the letter, then moved on. A month later, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hi." He sounded tired. "Can we talk?" "Sure." He was quiet for several seconds, then said, "Samantha's been asking about you." I frowned. "Why?" "She feels guilty." I didn't respond. Daniel continued, "She didn't think Mom would actually uninvite you." I laughed softly. "That's interesting." "I know. Did you defend me?" Silence. Then, "No." I nodded. "That's what hurt the most." "I know. I should have." "Yes." He sighed. "I'm sorry." For once, I believed him. Not because he apologized perfectly, but because he admitted exactly what he'd done wrong. He didn't blame Samantha. He didn't blame Mom. He didn't say I was too sensitive. He simply said, "I should have defended you." That mattered. We didn't suddenly become close again, but we started talking occasionally, slowly. 6 months later, Daniel and Samantha got married. I was invited. I almost declined. Then I realized something. I wasn't going for Samantha. I wasn't going for my parents. I was going because I wanted to see my brother get married. So I went. I wore a simple blue dress, sat quietly, didn't cause drama, didn't make a speech. After the ceremony, Samantha approached me. She looked nervous. "I owe you an apology." I listened. "I was threatened by you. I didn't expect that." She continued, "You seemed so independent, so confident, and Daniel respects you. I was afraid you'd judge me." I smiled sadly. "I wasn't judging you. I know that now." She took a breath. "I shouldn't have called you bad energy." "No." "I shouldn't have asked them to exclude you." "No." "And I definitely shouldn't have let them blame you when dinner fell apart." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." She looked relieved. "I don't expect us to be close. Neither do I. But I'd like to start over." I thought about it, then nodded. Okay, that was enough. Epilogue. Christmas came again the following year. This time, Mom called me months in advance. "Are you coming for Christmas?" I smiled. "I'll be there." She laughed. "Good." Then she asked, "Can I plan the menu?" "Yes." "And Samantha wants to know if you have any allergies." I laughed. "No." There was a pause. Then Mom said, "I've learned something." "What?" "Inviting someone into the family doesn't mean they get to decide who belongs." I smiled. That's true. The following Christmas was different. Nobody excluded me. Nobody asked me to pay for everything. Nobody treated my presence like a problem. We simply had dinner, like a family. And I realized something. The Aspen trip had cost me $37,000, but it gave me something far more valuable. Perspective. I had spent years believing I needed to fight for my place at my family's table. I didn't. If someone doesn't want you at their table, you don't have to beg for a chair. You can build your own. My thoughts. Being excluded by people you love can hurt deeply. But sometimes, their rejection reveals something important. You discover who actually values you. You discover who only expects things from you. And most importantly, you discover that your happiness doesn't have to depend on their approval. I didn't post that Aspen photograph to make my family jealous. I posted it because I was happy. And when my mother called, asking me to rescue the Christmas they had chosen to have without me, I finally understood that saying no wasn't selfish. It was healthy. Family should be a place where you're welcomed, not a place where you're invited only when someone needs something.